So you can start.
Good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Earth Sciences for the Lifetime Achievement Award. A lot of people have contributed to my research, collaborators, co-authors, students. And in a way, this award is for all of us. I'd also like to thank IITM Pune for setting up this webinar. My talk today is on modern Indian biodiversity, the geological factors that have been responsible for this. Basically, it's a talk on the interconnections between biodiversity, climate, and the drift of India. But before I do this, I'm indebted to a number of people for this particular day, and I'd like to thank them very briefly. First of all, I'd like to thank those faculty that gave me this opportunity so that I'm giving this talk to you today. This is the geology faculty at Lucknow University, and I'd like to thank my class fellows also for the companionship and for their support. I'd also like to thank my guide and supervisor for my PhD in, in the University of Minnesota, Professor Ari Sloan with the white hat, who led me through the intricacies of a PhD program. I'd like to thank my students. There are many of them. This is the only picture I was able to get. But there are many, and I'd like to thank all of them. I'd like to mention and recognize the support that I've received from my family, especially from my wife, both at home and in the field. I'm now going to start my talk. And as I said, my talk is on how biodiversity of India is very special, because India is very special in this regard. So my talk straddles biodiversity, climate, and the drift of India. There's a general concern about the loss of biodiversity these days, both on a global, regional, and on a local scale. Much work has been done on the loss of species, loss of ecospace, and the changing patterns of biotic distribution. But not many people have looked at the geological factors that actually are controlling biodiversity, not only in the past, but also in the present. And this, as I said, is the talk that I'm going to give today. If you look at this slide, you will see a snapshot of the Earth at 3 different times: 100 million, 70 million, and what it's like today. For the time being, don't look at India. Look at Madagascar and look at Australia. So here's Madagascar, and this is Australia. This is at about 100 million, and India, as you can see, is in between. If you look at 70 million, India has taken off for Asia. But if you look at Madagascar and Australia, they're basically in the same place. They've rotated a little bit, but relative to Africa, relative to Antarctica, they have not gone as far as India has. And by the time India reaches Asia, Madagascar and Australia, Madagascar especially, has remained nearly where it is, and Australia has moved a little forward. So what does this mean? If you look at the biodiversity of Madagascar, if you look at the biodiversity of Madagascar and Australia, you will find that it's very special. Madagascar has something like 90% of the species that are endemic, they're not known from any other place. And Australia, as you know, had a great diversity of marsupials. So the scientific question was, so what's happening to India? Now, there's, as I've tried to show you, that a lot depends on the drift of India. The drift of India. These, both Madagascar and Australia, are roughly in the same climatic zones where they were originally. But if you look at India, India has moved from a position something like 40 degrees south to the northern hemisphere. The climate has changed drastically. If you look at this left-hand diagram, you'll see a black line here. This is basically the global mean annual temperature today, 15 degrees Celsius or 16 degrees. And this red curvy line shows the deviation from this, the present global mean average. And it shows that how warm the Earth was. So if you look at some time here, let's say 100 million years ago or so, the Earth looked very different. When India had its fauna and flora at this point of time, the Earth was very different to what it is today. Today, the Earth is in an ice house, as you can see, and in the Mesozoic and far in the past, it was actually a greenhouse Earth. So a greenhouse Earth, in a greenhouse Earth, as you can see, the equatorial and the tropical zones are expanded. Whereas if you look at an ice house Earth, where India is right here in the northern hemisphere, you'll see that there are a number of thermal regimes. There are more thermal regimes here. And if this be the case, then unlike Madagascar and unlike Australia, India went through the tropical zone from a temperate to a tropical. It crossed the equator and now it's in the northern hemisphere. So there's going to be a great stress, a climatic stress on the biota that lived in India when it was 40 degrees south and what it is today. So that's one thing that we have to understand. And the other thing we have to understand, that still India is pushing into Tibet something like 3 to 5 centimeters every year. Again, it's nothing like Madagascar and not very, it's very dissimilar to Australia. So life, biodiversity, and has been changing throughout time. I'll just give you an example just to show you that sometimes biodiversity has affected atmospheric gases and sometimes atmospheric gases have affected biodiversity. If you look at this diagram on top, this basically shows you the increase in biodiversity. These are the number of families. As you can see, 500 million years ago, there were very few families of animals and plants, but this number kept on increasing to this point. This is where we are now, 0. So there have been setbacks also. These are known as extinction events. From time to time, the earth lost a lot of its animals and plants. This was a place, a time when earth lost nearly 96% of its species. At this point here, the dinosaurs and 70% of life took place. But by and large, the biodiversity has been increasing. And in a way, it mimics the increase in oxygen. So as you get more and more complex animals, you need more, they consume more oxygen in their metabolism. The other major gas that we have to look at is carbon dioxide. So 500 million years ago, 500 million years ago, the carbon dioxide was nearly 20 to 18 times what it is today. So it has gone down. And as oxygen went up, carbon dioxide went down. This basically reflects the fact that vegetation increased, forests increased, uh, photosynthetic plants in the ocean increased, and therefore they were able to suck out the carbon dioxide. So right now we are here, where humans have now raised the level a little bit, but basically it is down here. So this again shows you that everything changes as time goes on. Here we have seen that biodiversity has increased and other factors have increased or decreased. Now I'd like to show you, and many of you may be surprised, at the biodiversity at this point, right now, the global biodiversity right now. So if you look at this, you may be surprised. If you look at the blue portion, mainly insects and arthropods. And these are the number of species. So if you go by the number of species, you'll see that a large part of the biodiversity today, the global biodiversity today, is made up of insects and other arthropods, as you can see, spiders and others. And here we have the vascular plants. So if I was an alien from some galaxy and I looked at the global biodiversity, just from the point of view of species, I'd see that it's composed mainly of arthropods and insects. Humans or man is just one, this lone star in this wedge here of vertebrates. And the others, of course, are other animals and plants. So this is actually the global biodiversity today, and it may come as a surprise to many. Now, coming back to my talk, I'd like to give you an explanation, because this is the scientific question, that if Madagascar and Australia had such endemic biotas, what was actually happening in this continent, that subcontinent that we call India and Pakistan. So if you look at Australia, let's say, the marsupials came through South America, through Antarctica. At that point of time, Antarctica was not as cold as it is now, and the marsupials were able to cross, and they inhabited Australia, but they were not able to come to India. Indian migration was most probably from Africa through Madagascar, and therefore the type of animals and plants that you get around 200 million years ago are similar to those that you get in Madagascar and Africa, and dissimilar to those that you get in Australia. If you look at the next stage, this is where things really hot up. India has left Madagascar. It's drifting at the rate of 15 centimeters a year, which is quite a lot. And a number of things are happening at 65 million years. Firstly, you have one of the big extinctions, global extinctions, where 70% of all life disappeared, including the dinosaurs and a lot of animals that live in the seas. But other physical things were also happening. For instance, what we know as the Seychelles the islands of Seychelles, they were actually split off from a margin here. Here they are splitting off. And one of the biggest volcanic eruptions of all times, the Deccan volcanics, also happened at this time. Not to say about an asteroid that hit Mexico right at about this time. So 65 million was a time when a lot was happening. But again, note, Madagascar is there where it was, Australia is there where it was, but India has crossed the temperate zone and is heading towards the equator. So it is obvious that whatever animals and plants it had when it was next to Madagascar were under a lot of stress, climatic stress. Now, as I said, India and Madagascar were joined at one point of time, and at 65 million, just to give you one example, there are many, many examples, but just to give you one example, this is a carnivorous dinosaur known from India, which has the name Rajasaurus dunmadensis. And you'll see that it's quite similar, even if you're not a vertebrate person, just by shape, you will see it's very, very similar to a similar carnivorous dinosaur from Madagascar. They're nearly the same. So even though India was slightly different or separated from Madagascar, at 65 million, they shared a number of animals and plants together. Now, one very peculiar thing that happened quite by chance is that we were able to find the oldest record of grasses. And where did we find them? We found them in the dung of a dinosaur. So this is a dinosaur dung. This is a polished section. You can see that there are a lot of leaves, seeds, many, many plant materials. So when this was macerated, my colleague Vandana Prasad from the BSIP was able to recover these silica nodules. The silica nodules basically are known as phytoliths, and from the phytoliths, we were able to recognize that grasses, the oldest record of grasses was in India at this point of time. So many things were happening at 65 million years. The next set of data comes from lignite mines, and this is data that is roughly 54 million years or so. These are a number of open cast mines that are found in Rajasthan and in Gujarat. And we've been working here for quite some time. In fact, since 2004. And this, the biota that we have recovered from mines such as this has completely changed our concept and given us new light. It's opened up a new dimension about the animals and plants that were living in India when India was dashing off, drifting towards Asia. So this is the next set of data. The first was at 65, the second is at 54. So this is slightly complicated. I've purposely kept it complicated. It's complicated because I've shown what the sea floor looked like. If you look at this line here, the purple line here, this basically marks the separation of India and Madagascar. So this is Madagascar, this is India, and as India separated, you had a number of features on the sea floor. So we can very accurately map what actually happened when India separated from Madagascar. Let's start when India was actually attached to Madagascar. So when two land bodies are attached, animals and plants will cross over, and this is what they did. As I showed you, the dinosaurs were common both to Madagascar and to India. But after some time, India took off as an island. These black India diagrams show the time when India was an island, very similar to Madagascar and Australia. Island faunas, island floras are very, very distinctive. You know, Darwin studied the Galapagos Islands, and I've just mentioned again Madagascar. They have a number of forms that are actually either originating or endemic. So, India was an island from about 70 million to the point that it collided around 50 million. But even though it was an island, there was still some exchanges. And I will try to show you what these stages were. Firstly, during our studies in the lignites that I just showed you, we found a number of animals, and I'll make you a reconstruction of what these look like. We found the bones of the oldest bird. It happens to be a parrot. So these are the bones. They're very, very small. Hardly, this is 10 millimeters. So you can imagine, but it's very distinctive. So it's possible to recognize the oldest bird in India based on the bones that we recovered from the lignite mine. We also found the oldest rabbits. Rabbits, you know, jump, and therefore the ankle bones. Therefore, the ankle bones are very distinctive. And this was published in the Royal Society proceedings. So we have parrots, we have rabbits. And then we have primates. You may recall that Madagascar still has one of the rare lemurs that these are primates with large eyes and long tails. Well, at that point of time in India, at 54 million, we also found similar lower primates. So this is again to reiterate that a lot of holdovers from Madagascar and Africa are found in India. This is a picture of 54 million years old when of India. At that point of time, you had sal forests, the shoria forests. You had parrot ancestors, like I showed you. You had primates. You even had this fruit, sharifa or sitaphal as it's called. And then you had all these animals. You had artiodactyls, sheep-like animals, horse-like animals, animals that have become extinct, pterodons and coryphodons. You had the rabbits, and you even had a hyenodon, the carnivore. And in the rivers and in the lakes, you had a crocodiles, very different crocodile than you find today, and several types of fish. So this was what India looked like when it was an island drifting towards Asia. Very different from Madagascar, very different from Australia. One aspect, if you look at the present day insect fauna, this is the data from Ghosh 1996. It's dated, but according to Ghosh, the insect fauna of India shows a high percentage of endemism. So only 6% are part of the world fauna. But I think this study needs to be revised. But again, from those lignite mines, from amber, it's been possible for several workers to record the oldest record of social insects ants, wasps, and termites. So these are the oldest record of social insects found in the lignites in amber. And there's some more interesting material. You have spiders. Just see how beautifully they are preserved. And you have some flowers. So we have a lot of data. We have a lot of data from the lignites, which we can now relate to the modern biodiversity of India. And this is the first glimpse of what the present day biodiversity uh, must have looked like way back 54 million years. Now, the next set of data comes from nearing collision around 50 million. And here I must say that India and Pakistan provide a glimpse of whale evolution. They are the homes where whales originated. And there are a number of papers in Nature and Science that actually highlight this, because the oldest record of whales anywhere in the world is from India and Pakistan. In fact, the oldest uh, whale-like land mammal is known as Indo-Hyas. And it was quite a surprise when they did the genetics of whales and hippos. The whales and hippos were found to be very, very similar. So the early part of whale evolution is in a tectonic context. It is when India was nearing collision. You had a land animal, Indo-Hyas, that slowly evolved into a whale. The first whales are Pachycetus and Himalaya-cetus. You can see they still retain the hind limbs and forelimbs, but slowly and gradually they started losing the forelimbs and they became true whales. So the record of whales is really fantastic. The early record of whales is very, very good in India and Pakistan. And the first 10 million years or so of whale evolution is recorded here. So there's something about global biodiversity. We can say that we gave India was the center of origination of whales. So a number of papers that have actually commented on how whales originated and what they look like. The next major event that took place was collision. When there are many ages for collision, I'm taking 50 million because that's what I believe that we can date the animals and plants that came over from Central Asia. So at around 50 million, India collided with the Eurasian plate, and the animals and plants that were living in Eurasia, they crossed over. So biodiversity changed radically because the new forms, the new animals and plants, they actually swept through India, and many of the old plants that were in island India before that were wiped out completely. And the new entrants included several large forms, rhinos and crocodiles. So there was a big change in biodiversity when India dashed against Eurasia. This is one of the landmarks. Uh, so when India collided with Asia, there was still a part of the ocean that was left. You have two arms of the ocean that we consider possible in the around 56. One is an arm of the sea that goes through Ladakh. Another is an arm of the sea that goes along the foothills of the Himalayas. But slowly and gradually, the sea receded here. We've called it the Sindhu Sea. So now the Indus River, the sea receded. And how it receded, you can see at 25 million years, this is the coastline. And at 10 million years, this is the coastline. So there used to be a big ocean between Asia and India, and now it gradually vanished, and here we are. I'd like to show you, and this I'd like you to look at this image and remember the image. This is Kargil. Right now, Kargil is a cold desert. But 25 million years ago, it was a warm tropical forest. The sediments that you see were deposited by ancient river. And you had several tropical forms. You had things like fish, snakes, turtles, and a lot of deer. So this is quite prophetic that if you look at Kargil today, you can never imagine that way back in time, it was a tropical forest. And this is just the point that I'm trying to make, that if India keeps pushing into Asia, you will get a great catastrophe when it comes to the type of climate that we are going to experience. We found, and please note this, we found a rat type of animal from some beds here, and I will tell you a very interesting story about this rat-like animal. But I'd like you to remember this image, because the next diagram actually shows you what does the future hold. So the point that I've been trying to make is that India is still pushing into Asia around 3 to 5 centimeters a year. And this part is getting colder, higher and drier. And given a few million years, the Pamir Knot will be very close to Tashkent. So it's changing. Again, this is special to India. There are portions of the earth that are still where they were for 50 million years or 100 million years. But India is different. So India is still pushing into Asia, and therefore there's inherent instability as far as biodiversity is concerned. If this keeps on pushing, this will get drier and drier. So what has actually happened, that where it is still tropical, still wet, you are able to get refugia or relics from the days when India was attached to Madagascar. Some of the forms still survive here, and they have been able to migrate through the northeast part of India into Southeast Asia. So the sal forests, if you look at Southeast Asia, 80% of the forest canopy, 80% of the forest canopy are sal forests, shoria forests. And I showed you that the shoria forest, the first recognition as a fossil was around 54 million years. So things change around. Either they become extinct because the climate is changing, or they migrate to places where are similar. So if you remember from the diagram that I showed you, let me show it to you again. Just look at this rodent, and then I will show you what happened. If you look at this rodent that we found here, 25 million years ago, it was found in Ladakh, it was found in Pakistan. Around 10 million years ago, we find the same fossil in China and in Thailand, and in Japan. And lo and behold, in 2006, the rodent that we found in Kargil was found living in Laos in 2006. This is what it looks like. So this gives you some idea that depending on the climate, depending on the tectonics, the dynamics, animals and plants move around. Now, I just want to conclude. Basically, I've tried to show you that Indian biodiversity is ever changing because India is in a dynamic mode and it has gone through a number of climatic zones, and therefore it's very difficult to stabilize biodiversity here. So biodiversity is basically built up by holdovers and crossovers. We had a number of plants and animals that lived in Madagascar that are found in India. There were some migrations. We got a number of forms into India. We lost some that migrated out of India. The third, of course, I've not discussed because this actually pertains to recent times. Biodiversity has changed because human predation. So if you look at this diagram, you'll see that in the 16th century, Babur was hunting rhinos near Peshawar. So there was a forested area in Peshawar in the 16th century. And right now, what has happened in 500 years? We're trying to preserve the rhino in one sanctuary in Assam. So predation does count, but it's difficult to make this out in the fossil record. But this is a factor as far as biodiversity is concerned. I've kept on mentioning how climate affects biodiversity. Basically, you change the climate, you'll change the biodiversity. And in addition, in India, you had several tectonic features. You had the continent-continent collision, resulting in the rise of the Himalayas. So again, climate changed, and then you have the Tibetan Plateau. So since India is a special tectonic entity, the biodiversity will also be special. So I'd like to thank you. Thank you for a patient listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sahni. That was a very interesting talk on Indian biodiversity, how it got evolved. As usual, we have a few questions raised from the audience. I have kept it for you in the chat window. So please come to the close the screen share and come to your video.
Yes. I've come to chat.
Please close the screen share first. Yes.
Okay.
Please go to the chat and read the question and answer.
So while its journey, I'm reading out the question. While its journey from Madagascar to Himalayas, whether any species got extinct or any new species got evolved in the Indian subcontinent. Yes, well, this, of course, I've already mentioned this, that did any species get extinct? Well, there were a series of extinctions. So there were extinctions like the dinosaurs got extinct all over the globe. They also got extinct here. But as far as new species, there is a record of a form of a Cretaceous mammal that was found in India around 65 million. That actually is also found around 54 million. So there is, to answer this part of the question, yes, this is true. And whether any species got extinct, yes, a number of times. So the second question is, if Earth lost 90% of its species in mass extinction, how do we know they existed? does mass extinction create some changes in the way organisms evolve? So the fossil record at this point of time when extinction took place is very good. So we know the number of animals and plants that lived on land, that lived that lived in the sea. We know them from the fossil record. And that is why we can say that after the extinction event, these forms that were there as fossils are not found anymore. And therefore, 90% of the forms that are found in fossils in the Permian are just before 250 million years are not found after 250 million years. So it's obvious that a great extinction had taken place. So this, of course, mass extinction creates some changes. And uh, uh, one thing that one must learn, that after this great mass extinction of the Permian and Triassic, the dinosaurs came into extinction. So the question was, does mass extinction create some changes in the way of organisms evolve? Most certainly, you get a different kind because the conditions are different. You start, let us say, from a clean slate. And the dinosaurs arose some 225 million years ago after this, after the Permian Triassic extinction. And they were around for till 65 million years ago. So I don't know the calculation, but maybe over 150 million years. So you have a number of organisms that come into being after mass extinction. But it takes time. After mass extinction, life picks up very slowly, but after it picks up, it goes pretty fast. The third question is how this shifting of India from temperate tropical region influenced the diversity in India. So I've tried to show you that those plants, those animals that were able to survive in southern India, where the conditions, the tropical conditions still exist. For instance, take Sri Lanka. So wherever they were able to survive, they survived. But other forms, other forms were not able to bear the stresses of climate, and they became extinct, or they changed, or they migrated. I've shown you a diagram in which I showed you where in the slide what future holds for us, that those animals that have similar ecology, they will survive. But if you have uh, animals that are very, very prone to, very susceptible to climate, they will become extinct. So is this the last? What were the probable reasons behind the extraordinary high moving rate of the Indian plate? Well, I don't know the exact reason for that, because all I can say is that uh, there's differential movement along different parts, and I don't want to go into subduction or rates of subduction, but let us say that this was one of the great planetary events. The movement or the drift of India was a great planetary event, and perhaps because India was subducting to north at a fast rate, that's why the Indian plate moved fast. But usually this rate of movement is not that fast. After all, Australia is also moving. Australia is also moving, but it's moving at a very sedate rate. So I cannot tell you why it was extraordinary, except to tell you that that one of the reasons was this, that subduction rate was very high and material was being subducted uh, near the southern margin of Asia, and this may have been a factor in the high moving rate of the Indian plate.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sahni. You have answered all the questions. Thank you very much. And thank you for sparing your valuable time with the MOES webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You've been a great help, Dr. Balsara.
Thank you.
Should I close this now?
Yes, you may close the session. Computer division, we can go offline now.